That was awkward.
This is very awkward.
We're starting.
I've been recording since before you hopped on. You are listening to the Keeping It Juicy podcast.
Your main squeeze in nutrition.
Don't forget to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for a brand new episode.
Also, don't forget to add us on Instagram and Facebook at Keeping It Juicy Podcast.
Welcome to episode 56.
How much bro can a bro science? That's the main question.
Is the real question.
Yeah.
So without further ado, we will jump into the new nutrition in the news.
So basically, this one is kind of related to intermittent fasting, but not really. I'll go more into it. So basically, the study starts off, the title says, clinical study finds eating within a 10-hour window may help stave off diabetes, heart disease. That's the name of it. So basically, they talk about a time-restricted eating intervention that was put together by the researchers from the Salk Institute and the UC San Diego School of Medicine. And they basically looked at a 10-hour window and combined that traditional medicine. And they realized that it resulted in weight loss, reduced abdominal fat, lower blood pressure and cholesterol, and more stable blood sugar and insulin level for the participants. So, I mean, another thing that they did talk about was that specific time restricted eating basically supports an individual's circadian rhythm and is supposedly supposed to maximize health benefits. As we know, circadian rhythms are the 24-hour cycles of biological processes that affect nearly every cell in the body. So they're just trying to find the connection between, okay, let's just try to put this into a 10-hour window and give our body a break to kind of, I guess, refresh everything else. And they realize that this helps basically prevent symptoms of diabetes and heart disease, which, I mean, it's not something new, but this is just another study to add to what we already know. Am I the biggest fan of intermittent fasting? No, but the way that this was done, I think, is more so it's in a healthier way. Basically, the less calories you eat, the more you're going to result in weight loss versus like if you eat super early in the morning and then eat until way later at night, you're going to have a bigger window of eating.
So, yeah, like you said, I'm also not the biggest supporter of intermittent fasting. Of course, it works great for some people and it is the best tactic for them. But there is a lot of research behind intermittent fasting and how it interacts with other hormones such as melatonin and insulin. So that is likely why these different health outcomes are different when we look at intermittent fasting. So just another thing to add to the knowledge base. And yeah, like you said, I do think this is a better constructed study. You know, and a 10-hour window is not extreme.
No, not at all.
So I think when things get a little bit iffy when it comes like intermittent fasting, and we did a whole episode on intermittent fasting, but some people do every other day, eating, not eating. Some people do like full fasting, like for 30 days. And I'm just like, how do you like go to work? Like, do you have a job?
I don't know. I mean, it depends on a person's lifestyle and what they're doing and I guess those situations. But intermittent fasting or just this general time window can be beneficial for certain people. I mean, if you think realistically, a 10-hour window, you wake up, you eat your first meal at 8 o'clock, and you eat your last meal before 6 o'clock at night. That's not that bad.
Exactly. It's basically, in some ways, almost just eliminating, you know, given that window that you described, eliminating that late night snack before bed, which is typically something not healthy. Maybe it's chips, maybe it's a brownie, maybe it's a Christmas cookie. it's
Right.
not, carrot sticks that you're eating before bed. So probably
Don't
by
judge.
don't assume things. Um, so it could very well just be by eliminating the window where you're going to have some of those more, you know, disease provoking foods.
Right.
So
Right.
good thing to keep in
So,
mind.
yeah.
So now we're going to dive into the bulk of our episode.
The
We are
bro
going to go
science.
we are going to go over a couple very common myths or lies that float around in the bro science community and talk about the actual research behind it. So the first one is, and I've heard this all the time from many, many, many different guys, and it's that you need 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight.
Mm,
Okay. Most research that like nutrition research you read, will recommend zero point 0.7 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram. Those are different. Pounds to
yeah.
kilograms are different. So we'll do a little example. Let's just take a 150-pound person. According to bro science, this individual should have 150 grams of protein. Then let's take the highest range of this zero point 0.7 to 2.2 grams per kilogram for this 150-pound person. That would actually put them right at 150 grams. But the key difference is the recommended range.
Hmm.
Often those who are following bro science will exceed this 1 gram per pound because they think that's the minimum. So the literal upper limit of what science recommends is like the base of what bro science is recommending. So that's kind of where the problem lies. It's not
Right.
completely like made up out of thin air, I guess,
Hmm.
because it can be appropriate in like a very small section of the range, but we'll go into, are there any dangers? So there's not necessarily any dangers associated with it, but everything obviously requires context. Some people will argue that excess protein will cause damage to the kidneys, but unless literally all you are eating is protein and drinking absolutely no water, that's likely not going to be the case.
Mm-mm.
Harvard Health actually suggests not consuming more than 2 grams per kilogram for the average person who is an elite athlete. Sorry, bros, that's not you. You guys are not elite athletes, so there really is no reason to be consuming more than 2 grams per kilogram. So that 2.2 is not necessary for the average person.
Sorry, bros.
Sorry, bros.
But honestly, I probably said this in an episode back. It reminds me of I guess a mutual friend of mine that thought that was eating 2 grams of protein per body weight, and I told him that's not necessary. I think
Mhm.
you would
Mhm.
try to break that. I think the ideal range would be around 1 gram per kilogram. And then he took that as one, by the end of the conversation, he took that as 1 gram per pound. And I was like, oh shit, I guess that's better than the 2 pounds, 2 grams per pound.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the pound to kilogram is a key thing here.
It's more than twice.
Yeah,
Like,
2.2.
yeah. So, anyways, the conditions linked to high protein diets are typically high cholesterol and higher risk of cardiovascular disease. This is possibly due to increased animal protein intake rather than actual protein itself. And then it can be linked to increased cancer risk, kidney disease, and kidney stones, weight gain. Yes, this might seem odd, um, considering it's also a proposed weight loss strategy. But if you overconsume anything, protein, fat, whatever, it's going to be converted into extra fat on your body. It doesn't matter where exactly it comes from. And then excess protein can lead to constipation or diarrhea. I mean, possibly due to the lack of fiber. I mean, it's important to note that these are only associations. That is, some studies have noted these conditions among people on high protein diets, but that doesn't mean that the protein itself actually causes the condition. Also, some of these are not necessarily due to the protein itself, but rather due to how the protein is consumed and or what the protein replaces. For example, a high protein diet that contains a lot of red meat and high fat dairy products might lead to higher cholesterol and a higher risk of heart disease and colon cancer, while other high protein diets, which are rich in plant based proteins, may not carry those similar risks. And another study found weight gain was more likely when protein replaced carbohydrates in the diet, but not when it replaced fat. So that's just one study that we had found. And the main danger behind this high protein may lie if an individual relies heavily on protein supplements to acquire these ridiculous amounts of protein. And we know that supplements itself are not that well regulated. So contamination, poor manufacturing practices may cause dangers. Herbalife. um, but
Maybe.
I'm serious. Like sometimes you have those protein powders that have those filler stuff in it to make you gain some more calories, but not everything in it. Like the proprietary blends may not
Mhm.
be the best thing for you. So
Exactly. So the problem might not lie with the protein itself. It's just more so how unregulated the supplement industry actually is, which may pose the potential danger.
right.
So, all right, myth number one debunked. Let's move on to number two. So, another one, most people have probably heard this one. You need a gallon of water per day. It's a hashtag, it's all over the place. It's a thing. So, just to put this in perspective, a gallon of water is 128 ounces of water. We're going to be referring to water in ounces in a little bit.
Hmm.
Uh, so, what do the facts actually say about how much water you need? There is actually no specific number for how much water you need to drink a day. It differs for every individual. To determine how much you need to consider your body weight, physical activity level, and climate. Um, Physical activity and climate change on a daily basis, so your water intake requirements will change too.
Hmm.
The Institute of Medicine suggests that adequate water intake for men is about 125 ounces, while women it's 91 ounces. That's probably our best guess at like where to start. But again, that was Institute of Medicine. If you look at different resources, you're going to get a different number. Uh, but for purposes of this, we're referring to the Institute of Medicine. So in reality, this 125 ounces for men and 91 ounces for women isn't too like far off from the gallon of day bro science,
Hmm.
for someone who actually exercises and needs that much water. The issue with this myth lies with people who are not regular exercisers, thinking that because these fit bros drink a gallon of water per day, that if they start drinking a gallon of water per day, they will automatically become more healthier. As we know, much more goes into this. And keep in mind, the recommendation from the Institute of Medicine includes water from beverages and food. That's important. You get a lot of water from your food, especially if you're eating a lot of vegetables.
Hmm.
Some people still follow the 8 by 8 rule, which recommends drinking 8 glasses of 8 ounces of water per day. But this rule is like mostly arbitrary and it's not really based on research. That would only put you at 64 ounces of water. If you're exercising, it might not be enough, but you know your thirst cues best. A
Hmm.
good rule of thumb is to listen to your body and drink when you feel thirsty. This should be enough to maintain good hydration levels, but this is not, relying on thirst is not enough for everyone. Athletes, older adults, and pregnant women may need to actually focus on drinking more water versus just depending on those thirst cues.
Right. And I know that as you get older, your thirst cues definitely goes down. I know for a fact that my dad, he is in his early 70s and he does not drink shit. So because I'm just
Horrible.
not thirsty. Yeah, I'm just not thirsty. So that's just something to keep in mind. And I think that 64 ounces. may be good for those that don't drink water in the first place.
Right.
So,
Mhm.
so with that being said, let's talk about water toxification. Drinking a lot of water increases the amount of water in your blood. Duh. So this water can dilute the electrolytes in your blood, especially sodium. So when sodium levels fall below 135 millimoles per liter, it's called hyponatremia. So the role of sodium is that it helps balances fluids between the inside and the outside of the cells. So when that sodium level drops due to excess water consumption, fluid shifts from the outside to the inside of the cells, causing them to swell. So when this happens to brain cells, for example, it can produce dangerous and potentially life-threatening effects. There is a thing called, such as too much water. So how much is too much? So you have a greater risk of developing water toxification if you drink a lot of water in a short period of time. The risk is less if you drink the same amount over a much longer period of time. Symptoms of hyponatremia can occur from as little as zero point 0.8 to 1 gallons of water in a short period of time. So that's like 3 to 4 liters. Your kidneys can eliminate about 5.3 to 7.4 gallons of water a day, but they can't get rid of more than 27 to 33 ounces per hour. Therefore, in order to avoid hyponatremia symptoms, you really should not be drinking more than 27 to 33 ounces of water per hour on average. So, what is that? Two regular water bottles per hour. Many reported cases of water intoxication result from drinking large amounts of water in a short period of time. I think there was actually a news story about this woman. There was a contest of who can drink the most amount of water and go through a roller coaster ride multiple times to win some sort of prize, and the woman ended up dying.
Yeah.
So
I've heard that one before.
so there's also another example of hyponatremia. So a report showed that soldiers who developed symptoms after consuming only half a gallon of water per hour. So basically, bottom line is the kidneys are capable of excreting up to 7 gallons of fluid per day. However, like we said before, they cannot excrete more than 1 liter per hour. Therefore, drinking more than this is not a good idea. So, is there any risk in this bro science? Probably not, unless you drink your gallon in too short of a time span. And the only
Like an
time,
hour.
right, and the only time drinking a little bit more might be acceptable is if you're working out or something like that. That
Right.
causes you to lose that water. So,
Right.
but if you're sitting at your desk with a gallon, you don't need to chug that all
It's
at one time.
probably unnecessary. I mean, for the bros who are, have a lot of muscle, therefore they need a lot of water, a gallon probably is appropriate but for the average person, probably not.
Mm-mm.
Will damage occur? Probably not, unless, like we said, you drink it way too fast. But it's also not necessary, so you're probably just going to waste more time going to the bathroom all the time. Um, so
Yeah, don't do it.
so moving on to myth number 3 is you need to eat 6 meals a day to keep your metabolism high. This was actually like, a trend in the dieting world, not just bros, but
Right.
it's pretty heavy in the bro science world too. So the main concept of small frequent meals is the idea that it takes energy to digest food. So if you're eating frequently, you are burning more calories to digest that food. In theory, this sounds nice, eat to burn calories type deal. But
Mhm.
the research also shows that small frequent meals may not have much of an effect on the thermic effect of food. Rather, it's our basal metabolic rate, which has the highest effect on the amount of calories that we need and what we burn. So, while pre and post workout nutrition is very important to progress and muscle building and things like that, most of us don't really need 6 meals a day. unless that just really works out for you and your schedule and you love to do it, by all means go for it.
Hmm.
But ultimately, total calories, total protein, carbs, and fats will be the thing to determine long-term progress. If you're in a calorie deficit and you're trying to split up your calories equally between 6 meals, each meal might end up being relatively low in calories and not give you that complete sense of fullness.
Hmm.
You see this a lot in women's bodybuilding, and that's why they'll bulk up on foods like cucumbers, shredded lettuce, zucchini to, make it bulkier. Because let's just say, they're on a shoot, I don't know, 1,200, 1,300 calorie diet. You
Oh
split
God.
that into 6 meals. Each meal is not going to have a substantial amount of calories. That'll, not keep you full very long. So
By the way, who eats 1,200 calories?
I did when I was on prep.
That well, your prep did not go over that well. So,
Yeah. So take note, everybody. But everyone's
di-
different. Everyone's very different. But it
I,
wasn't for me.
no, 1,200 calories is not for the majority of people, I would feel.
Exactly. You just
So,
see that thrown around a lot. So
right. So basically, is there any risk to this eating 6 times a day? Probably not, besides the stress and annoyance of having to cook and prep 6 meals a day on top of washing those 6 Tupperwares every day, unlike some people who just throw away their Tupperware to make it easier. But other than that, it's a pretty harmless tactic. I mean, if that works for you, just do it. Obviously, intermittent fasting gurus completely argue with the 6 meals a day because of insulin and that whole argument in itself. Basically, intermittent fasting promoters argue that insulin inhibits lipolysis, in turn, inhibiting your ability to use stored body fat for fuel. So, I mean, whatever floats your boat, honestly. I
yeah.
mean, I sound like a yoga, whatever. I sound like
Hmm. Yeah.
I just yeah.
But that is truly what it comes down to, doing what works for you and your schedule. And, this whole 6 meals a day thing from Bro Science, I can only imagine it came about by like having 4 meals a day, which is not unreasonable.
Yeah.
Um, I typically have 4 meals a day, and
Mhm.
then pre and post workout. That turns into 6 eating times per day. Depending on how many calories you can actually have,
Right.
your pre and post workout may actually be a meal, depending on what you consider a meal or not. And that really comes down to, a lot of different things. To a girl on a bikini prep, a meal could be 250 calories. A
Right.
big guy trying to do a powerlifting competition, his meals could be 700 calories. It just depends how it breaks apart, and what
Right.
you choose to consider meals, snacks, pre-workout, post-workout. So, 4 solid meals, pre-workout, post-workout, 6 eating times per day. It
Um,
gets turned
right.
around a lot.
I mean, it really depends as long as you're not just eating one huge meal a day. Because, I mean,
Right.
a lot of my patients do that and they're not in the best health condition. But
Right.
that's a that's actually a topic for another time, actually.
And, intermittent fasting will completely argue with small frequent meals, but, you talk to diabetes educator and they're preaching small frequent meals. So,
Yeah, so it's
it
completely different.
yeah. So,
So, I
but
don't
from a
know.
bro science perspective, do you need to eat 6 times a day?
Hmm.
Probably not. But again, everyone is very different. Everyone has different calorie needs, protein needs, carbohydrate needs. Everyone's training is very different. So, case
Right.
by case basis.
So if you're a bro out there, pay attention. And, and so I hope these basically give you guys some sort of idea, especially coming into the new year of 2020. I feel like we're living in the future.
I
So,
know.
mhm.
Crazy.
So with that being said, let's kind of close out this episode with a social media shout out, our first social media shout out of the year. And that goes to dietitian.paola, Paola. And she actually became a dietitian as of this past summer in August. And she prides herself in being a Colombian living in the US. And she has amazing food pictures and infographics. And I think especially now that she became a dietitian, she's incorporating a lot of that into it, and I'm really digging what she has on her page. So definitely check her out, and thank
Yeah.
you so much for supporting us.
So we hope you found this episode interesting. We are actually planning on doing a monthly debunking episode, kind of compile them all into one. So if
Right.
you see any nutrition fads out there that you want us to debunk, please send those our way.
Bullshit. But
All right. With
all right.
that, thank you guys, and we'll catch you in the next one.
Thanks, guys.
Bye. You can't wink.
Why? You said I could.
I mean, like, you physically, like, can't. There we go. Bye. Thanks for listening to the Keeping It Juicy podcast.
Your main squeeze in nutrition.
Don't forget to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for a brand new episode.
Also, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Keeping It Juicy Podcast.
We'd love to hear from you, so please leave us a review.
5 stars, no less.
On whatever platform you're listening to, or send us an email at keepingitjuicypodcast@gmail.com.
Or if you have any topics you'd like for us to touch upon, shoot us an email. Until next time, don't do anything that I wouldn't do.